I told a story. I had 7 slides. I read a book called The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, and they talked about how he never had more than 7 words on each slide. And that's kind of a style that I've incorporated into my own. So I say all that to say that you always have to be a student, always be ready, because opportunity literally is when, preparation meets luck, right? That's kind of what the situation is. So always be a student, be willing to take those 2 steps back, whatever, whether it's doing an internship or an entry level position, and just be persistent. Don't give up. Don't give up.
Is it a tech podcast? Well, technically, yes. This is the show for current and future techies who are curious about exploring the world of tech. You'll get to hear from exciting guests, highlighting the diversity of roles and careers within the space, how you can get started, but also the life that comes along with it before, during, and after. My name is Stella, and this is the Technically Yes podcast. Hello. Welcome back to the Technically Yes podcast. I'm your host, Stella, and I'm super excited to be here. I'm joined with Corey Kareem from the 3 Questions podcast. I had the pleasure of being in his podcast. I believe it was last year.
Indeed.
I was on your pod.
Correct.
Yeah. And, it's got to return the favor. So I'm super happy that you're here. Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me, Stella. I really appreciate it.
Of course. My pleasure. So let's jump right into it, Corey. As you know, this podcast is all about, your tech career, kind of how you navigated the space, where you're at now. So yeah, give us a little bit of a rundown. Tell us who you are for those who don't know.
Yeah, it's so interesting being on this side of the questions. I'm used to asking the questions, and now it's like, hey, tell somebody a quick bio about yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start off by saying, I'm Corey Kareem. That's my first and middle name. Jamaican born, Toronto raised, New York groomed. My career didn't actually start off in tech. I went to school for television and radio in New York City. I had the opportunity to work for some pretty notable media companies like Atlantic Records, MTV, NBC, so on and so forth. So my actual dream in college was to either work in the development area of the TV and film business. So that's the department that's responsible for coming up with new show ideas, new show concepts, or taking an existing show and finding ways to kind of improve that existing intellectual property. The other kind of what I wanted to do was to get into more so the advertising side of the field. I was inspired by the movie Jerry Maguire. I'm going to date myself here. I was in high school when that movie came out. And although he was in sports marketing, he was an agent, there was still like a lot of connection to that. And I took a class in high school called Communication Technologies that allowed me to use like Pro Tools and some of these other software programs and do video editing and kind of get a sample of all aspects of media. And I was like, if I can combine the pitching and presenting standpoint of media with the television side and and that's what I want to do. Long story short, I went to school for that. Ended up working for a British ad sales firm on Wall Street. Then came back to Canada, Toronto, where I'm at now, due to some personal reasons. It was a long journey to get into kind of media and tech. So I'll skip all of that. There was a lot of odd jobs there, a lot of stuff I had to do to grind it out. There was a lot of stuff there. And then I got an opportunity at Rogers Media to go into broadcast. I started off there. I took 2 steps back. At 31 years old, I became a coordinator. So put those two together, 31 and becoming a coordinator just so I can get into the right division.
Yeah.
I made that bet. Within a year, someone I used to work with was like, hey, we have an opportunity in our digital department at Rogers Media. Are you interested? It's yours if you want it, basically.
Okay.
And so I said, tell me more. Long story short, I took that opportunity, and I've been working in the digital side of businesses for the last, I want to say 7-8 years now.
Nice. Oh, I love that so much. I want to point out something that you said, the fact that you had to take that step back in order to get to where you are today. And I feel like what happens so often, a lot of people see that step back as like a setback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really see the amount of opportunities that can come from just like, yeah, let me just take a bit of a, let me take a beat.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not doing the most, like, something that you're super into,
Right.
but the fact that it yields something in the long run
Yeah.
is pretty dope.
Yeah, if I can, just extend upon that point, I would say that in most cases that I've seen, even with some of my other friends that did take a step back, I know people that were in their late 20s that did kind of like internship jobs, but it was in a role or field that they love. Long term, now looking at where they're at now, it definitely paid off. But I think what makes it hard for this generation coming up is with platforms like social media, we're so used to or seeing instant gratification that you feel like you're entitled to those opportunities right away. And I get that. You should, if you went to school, you paid your dues, there's a certain level of expectation you have. But I'm just going to say it worked out for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's kind of missing from this generation coming up.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so easy to see someone else in a
Hmm.
position where you want to be and just assume that, their path was easy, right? Like we
Right,
see the end result on social media quite
right,
often. And sometimes it's not even the end result. Like let's
right.
be real, a lot of people are over embellishing themselves on social
1000%.
media, right?
It's the highlight reel.
Exactly. That's it. So it's so easy to assume that like, hey, I should be there by now.
Yeah.
But it's also like not really understanding the journey and what people go through in order to
Right.
get there, right?
Right. Social media is not good at giving context.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Hmm.
So in today, like, what's your day to day like? What do you do?
Yeah. So my day job today is I wear three different hats. So in terms of what I do as my 9 to 5, as my career, I work for Spotify in their ad sales
Nice.
division. So what that means exactly is we work with all the major, we call them holding codes, but major ad agencies that work with any brand that you can think of. So the agencies that I work with represent brands like Puma, Holt Renfrew, which is for American listeners, that's like a Bloomingdale's, a Canadian version of Bloomingdale's. Another brand that I work with was just like Harry Rosen, which would be like the Canadian version of Brook Brothers, Burger King, so on and so forth. And so these agencies will come to me and say, "Hey, Corey, such and such brand has 300,000, $500,000. They're looking to reach millennials and Gen Zs. Using Spotify, how can we effectively reach this target audience group?" So I'll come up with what's called a media proposal or media plan. I'll work with my account manager and other people in my business department, and we'll basically come up with this plan, and I'll pitch it to them. In most cases, that's in the form of an email. Some cases, I'm doing that over a chat like this, or I'm going in person. But basically, I pitch and present media execution ideas for a living at Spotify.
Okay,
Outside of
nice.
that, I've recently become a producer on a film series project called Wildflower, which actually just got
Ah,
picked up by a mid-tier American network. More news to come on that soon. So
oh, that's so
I'm very
exciting.
excited about that. And we actually were screened in the American Black Film Festival back in Miami last month. And so I got to be a part of my first screening opportunity, which was pretty huge.
Oh,
And then lastly, what
nice.
you know me for, Stella, is, I podcast. I have a podcast
Yes.
called Three Questions by Corey Kareem, where I sit down with amazing people like Stella. And instead of talking about their wins and successes, we talk about how they conquered failure.
And guys, if you haven't already, check out his podcast. What I love about your podcast, it's like nice, it's easy to take in, it's bite size, it's not too long, but like tons of value, which is really fun.
I
And yeah,
appreciate
some
that.
really dope
Thank you.
stories. So yeah. Yeah, no, that's amazing. So tell me a little bit about working at Spotify. Um, when I hear Spotify, it's like, it's not like the Googles and the Facebook, but it's big tech, right? And considering the fact that you work with all these amazing company, Harry Rosa and Burger King, like those are big clients to have.
Right.
So what does that look like? Like what's your day to day like? What are some of the challenges that you face
Yeah.
at work?
Great question. Challenges is like, so Spotify is obviously an audio-based platform, although we're expanding more into the visual realm with now offering like video podcasts, so on and so forth. Um, so the challenge is for a lot of advertisers, a lot of brands, they don't still have a strong level of belief in digital audio, although it is growing. And so there's always this level of education that I have to provide clients, even with the power of podcasts. We know that there's been a huge podcast boom over the last 5 or 7 years, but when it comes specifically to digital advertising, advertisers, marketers want to be able to track. And for a long period of time, there wasn't that kind of transparency with podcasts, although that has changed because Spotify has acquired some great assets and developed those assets to give marketers the opportunity to track results. So I would say that's the biggest challenge is the education piece. Typically clients like to rely on social. They like to rely on video. That's still the 800-pound gorilla. And so we've obviously taken some of that feedback and kind of reinvested into the platform at Spotify. But it's always about educating the client on the power of audio. One of the things that I do to kind of explain that, Stella, is a story that I always share. And again, this will date myself. I always talk about how audio, how music improves your memory. So I tell this story about when I was 16, my mom used to send me with my aunt and uncle in the U.S. And this particular time, my uncle's picking me up from playing basketball. He was a military guy, so I was playing basketball on base in Ohio, the great state of Ohio. Shout out to Ohio
shout
listeners.
out to Big OH.
Right,
I used to live there, you know.
Yes, I remember. That's right. That's the connection, right? So Dayton is where I was at specifically.
Okay.
And he's picking me up. I'm 16, and in the back of his '88 Volvo, but this was in the early 2000s. My little cousin, who was 2 years old, was sitting in the back of the car. And on the way home, there was this very popular song that was playing over and over and over again on the radio. It was top 40 back then. We get home, we're having dinner around the family table, and out of nowhere, my little 2-year-old cousin, who, by the way, is now 25 years old, starts singing the words. Get this, Stella. Starts singing the words of the thong song, word for word. The whole entire chorus, just
that's funny.
Out of nowhere at the dinner table. Everyone's getting a laugh out of it except for my aunt, the mother of that 2-year-old child. And anyways, the reason why I tell that story when I'm sitting with clients is like, to this day, every time I hear the thong song, I think about that specific moment in time. And that's the power of music. That's the power of audio. It's a different experience than, being on social media and watching television.
Yeah, I love that. It's so funny because I was talking to someone that works in the hotel industry, and that's a thing that they talked about is the fact that when you walk into hotels, you usually hear background music, right? They're curating an experience. If you go to like the Bisha Hotel in downtown Toronto, there's a specific scent that they have, right? Certain candles that they burn. So you're touching all of the senses, right? And really understanding that core memories are built upon that.
100%.
And yeah, that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah.
So for someone that is hoping to do what you do today, like what would you recommend for them? I mean, your journey was obviously quite lengthy and you took, some steps back and things like that. But if you could do it all over again, what would you do?
Man, I often think about that. And that's a question I ask a lot on my podcast as well. Like, what would you tell like your younger version of yourself? I think for me is... I think if I start back with school, I think I also would have majored in like business administration. I feel like getting some level of business experience is helpful from just a thinking process, as opening up your mind as to different ways of thinking, right? I think everyone should kind of have like a business oriented mindset to a certain level or a certain extent, and I mean that in a sense, Stella, in a way that we evaluate opportunities. So I think of having that kind of business acumen and how you evaluate certain opportunities in your life. I think that's really helpful. But I would ultimately say to listeners, to your audience, that I think, even after you've graduated, if you're not kind of getting the looks and opportunities you want, you have to be willing to go the extra mile. And what I mean by that is you might have to take an internship while working. It might be on the weekends. It might be after your 9 to 5. You might have to take some additional courses. It's that extra. Let's just look at it. It took me 3 times. You talk about not getting context. It took me 3 times to get into Spotify, right? And even when I had my interview process, I was competing against somebody that had 3 years more experience in my role, and they're already at a notable company, which was TikTok.
Okay.
What
Yeah.
separated me from that person was my level of creativity, which I work on my craft all the time. The second thing is my presentation style. This guy had 20 slides, was data dumping.
Oof.
I told a story. I had 7 slides. I read a book called The
Mm-hmm.
Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, and they talked about how he never had more than 7 words on each slide. And that's kind of a
Okay.
style that I've incorporated into my own. So I say all that to say that you always have to be a student, always be ready, because opportunity literally is when, preparation meets luck, right? That's kind of what the situation is. So always be a student, be willing to take those 2 steps back, whatever, whether it's doing an internship or an entry level position, and just be persistent. Don't give up. Don't give up.
Nice. Nice. I love that. I love that. Yeah, you hear that, guy? Stay ready so you ain't gotta get
There
ready,
you go. Stay
right?
ready.
Mm-hmm. That's it. So for someone, let's say if you are not, because to me, going to school or being in school and thinking about what you're going to do post-graduation, of course, that applies to those that are in school,
Right.
whether you're younger or a little bit older. If someone's mid-career now and they want to transition,
Yeah.
what would that look like for them, would you say?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So if they're in a company that has what they want to do, then it's having those conversations with your superiors or the people that you work with, creating that kind of career path. That's assuming that you're in an environment where they're open to doing things like that. I understand that that's not everyone's working situation.
Yeah,
But it could also mean what happened to me at Rogers Media. So when I started there, I talked about, taking a coordinator position because I knew it was going to get me into, it was a foot into the department that I really wanted to be into. So yeah, I had, I was making more money than that position was offering. I had, beyond the skill set they were asking for, but I knew that I didn't have enough skin in the game in the media business at that particular time. So again, someone that's mid-career that's looking to make a change, sometimes it means taking a lesser role just so you can get into the right lane and make that bet. In fact, my boy who referred me to Spotify, he did that. He had a pretty high position at a major publisher out here in Toronto called St. Joseph's, like the head of monetization or digital monetization. And Spotify came out to him and recruited him for a role he did like 2-3 years ago. And he thought about it. He's like, it's even a little less money.
yeah.
I've already done this role. I'm past this. But he's like, Spotify is a big pond. So he's like,
It really
I'm gonna
is.
make this bet. I'm gonna do this role. And he did that role for almost 2 years until he got into the role he really wanted to. He made that bet
Oh,
on
wow.
himself, and he's never looked back since. And he's very thankful he did it. So it's having
Yeah.
that long-term mindset, betting on yourself, and just really keeping an eye out for different opportunities. And the last thing I will say too, for people looking to make that mid-transition shift, if they're mid-career or even if they're beginning their career, I don't think personally, Stella, that a lot of people invest enough into relationships. And what I mean by that is everyone that you work with, you should always try to make time to connect with those people on some level. Don't be the
Yeah.
person that only reaches out when you get laid off or you're really looking to switch. Just sometimes just check up on people, see how people are going, get some industry insight, get some intel. I think keeping relationships warm when you don't necessarily need them is a huge factor that will pay dividends for you in the future.
Oh, I love that so much. And I completely agree. I love networking. And it's funny, I met Corey at a networking event.
There you go.
We were in Atlanta, Georgia for Invest Fest. And I think it was like at the end of the day, day 2 or whatever it was, we're in the hallway, literally just chatting, networking. Turns out we were both from Toronto. Turns out he had this dope podcast. And I was like, I want to start mine.
Yeah.
You should come on mine. He's like, come on mine.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's how this kind of happened and how we even met. And it is just that, right? The relationship building portion, being able to build and cultivate those relationships while you're at work as well. I feel like oftentimes you just want to clock in, clock out.
Right.
But yeah, these are the people, I mean, build those relationships. There's nothing wrong with it. Whether or not, like, you never know if you're going to need someone in the future,
Right.
but also beyond that, it just makes work more enjoyable.
1,000%. One thousand
Yeah,
percent.
even just beyond that. So
Yeah,
yeah, I love
one
that.
of the guys I used to work with, actually, he was like an OG when I was in this
Mm-hmm.
coordinator position at Rogers Media. He told me at a certain point in his career, Stella, he never had to apply for opportunities anymore. They all
Yep.
came from, people he worked with being like, hey, you'd be great for this
Mm-hmm.
role. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
ideal position you want to put yourself in. And I always say to
Yeah.
like my team, like I find like 60% of being lucky is just putting yourself in the right environment. So
Yeah.
like,
Exactly.
the conference that we both went to, that's an example of putting yourself in the right environment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 100%. 100%. I love that. Are you going this year, by the way?
Yeah, you know what? I wasn't. I was on the fence,
Mm-hmm.
but then Michael Yacht, who you I think you know,
Yes.
yeah, he's like he wasn't able to go due to a personal reason last year, and he had like bought his ticket and everything, so he still had
Mm-hmm.
his flight credit. So he's like, I'm going this
Okay.
year. I'm good.
Okay.
And that kind of pushed
Nice.
me over the edge. And so, yes,
Mm-hmm.
to answer your question, I will be there.
Okay, nice. Well, enjoy.
Yeah.
Have so much fun. I won't be there this year.
Hmm.
I'm kind of in the implementation phase of
Gotcha.
everything that I've learned and everything, but
Hmm.
I know it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
They do such a great job
Yeah.
putting that whole thing together. I can't believe how many people were there. I was
Yeah.
blown away.
12,000.
And so many Toronto people. I was
Yeah.
shocked and I loved seeing that.
Yeah.
So that's dope.
100%.
Okay, okay. Now,
Hmm.
let's get into some of the fun stuff
Yes.
because I mean, I have you on Instagram
Hmm.
and I saw you were catching flights, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And when I found out that you were traveling for work, that
Hmm.
was even more exciting.
Hmm.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so if you're talking more so last year, I think I was really catching flights. I think for 6 months out of the year, I was on a plane. Two of those were personal, but four out of the six were for business. So last year, 2022, I was in the New York office twice. One of them was more of I need to go here, and I actually expensed it on my own dime because, like I
Okay,
talked
nice.
about, networking. And
Mm-hmm.
just to give further context, the New York office for Spotify is like the heartbeat of the company. That's where
Mm-hmm.
all the big wigs are. That's where all the people that do some of the most amazing things in the company. That's where they are. And what did I just say? 60% of luck is just putting yourself in the right environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, me and my boy who referred me, we both went out there for this event that they had for black employees, like a um, black and tech networking event at Spotify. And
Nice.
from there, we met people that led to other opportunities. And then because it was my first year within Spotify, they have something called intro days where they fly you out to the head office and you kind of go through like an immersive experience, learning about the company, the culture, hearing from the co-founders, the leadership team. You get a chance to connect with other Spotifyers from around the globe, from Dubai to Brazil to the UK, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went to Sweden, which is another country you have a lot of
Yeah.
connection with.
Shout out Sweden.
Yeah, so that was my first time out there. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I had a great time in
Did
Sweden.
you?
Yeah, I wish I knew more about it going there because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of us were just kind of winging it while we were
Yeah.
there. But I did do some like sightseeing. Went for a
Mm-hmm.
run. Almost got ran over because they got a crazy bike culture. Don't mess around with
Oh
Swedes and
yeah.
their bicycles, man. They don't.
Toronto has nothing on
No, they
Sweden's bike
don't.
culture.
They
Nothing.
don't. Because I guess it's not warm for too long there. So when
Mm-hmm.
it's nice weather, they don't mess around. They get outside.
Oh yeah.
They soak it for everything it's worth. But really, so that was a big trip, and that was in the summer. So I was out there for a week. Obviously I got a chance to extend my trip and go to like Paris and London, two
Mm-hmm.
places I've never been before. And then I was back in New York in November for another BLK event for Black employees at Spotify. And out there, I got to meet Trevor Noah.
Oh
I got
nice.
to meet the guy X Xavier Jernigan, who's the voice behind Spotify's AI DJ. If you guys have that. And
Okay. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so those are some of the cool things I got to do. And then, in July we were in San Diego for an offsite. So I did get
Okay.
to catch some flights, like you said,
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah.
This year not as much, but we'll be on maybe one or two in the back half of the year.
Okay, nice. That's so
Yeah.
fun. And for those who don't know, Spotify is a Swedish company.
There you go.
So that's why you ended up in Sweden,
Correct.
for those wondering. Yeah.
Correct.
That's super cool. So now so you went to this Black in Tech event. Of course, this podcast, I want to highlight the, Black people, but people of color in the tech space. So how have you found that? Because I find it's very dependent on department that you work for as well,
Right.
right? Like the tech space is so diverse. There's so many different areas of tech, and depending on where you work within the tech space, you can like be the only one or you're one amongst some,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what does that kind of look like for you?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it depends on how you look at it. So I shouldn't necessarily say unfortunately, but I'm always usually the only one or one of few, as you just put it. And to be honest with you, Stella, that used to kind of be a little bit of a mental block for me, or distraction. That's probably a better word. I used to kind of get stuck on that. Like, what if people just think I'm some kind of diversity quota or higher? I used to let kind of those narratives seep into the brain, or
Oh yeah.
do I really belong here? Because I went through that for a long period of time, way before I was even at Spotify. But then I had a conversation with somebody that definitely understood my position, and he was an executive, and he was Black like me, and he's like, I get all that, Corey, but he said to me, the jig is already up. They already know that you're Black, and they hired you
Right.
for a reason. And he's like, instead of looking at it like that, and yeah, you might be the only guy in the room, but you need to look beyond that and say, I am the only me in this room. I'm the only Corey Kareem in this room, irrespective
Amen.
or race, creed, color, whatever it is.
Right.
And I've adopted that approach, and it's worked for me since. Now, does that
love
mean that,
that.
there might be microaggressions and stuff? I mean, those will happen. I think those will always be there, because you got to understand, people are also still getting to know each other. You could be working with somebody that grew up in a town where there was nobody that looked differently than how they look.
Yeah.
So you're their first experience, right? So to answer your question, yes, I'm usually the only one or one of few in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. But like you said, it shouldn't be a deterrent.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that I've kind of told myself as I've gone through my own journey within the tech space is that they hired me for a reason. Like they want me to be here. It's not, I have the same thoughts of like, am I a diversity hire? What quota am I filling? But it's like when you go through an interview process, and like in the tech, depending on the company, but sometimes it's very lengthy, right? And it's a conscious decision that they're making.
Right.
Because when I did hiring for my company, the things I thought about is like, this is someone I'm going to be working with closely every single day. Is this someone that I can get along with? Are we going to understand each other? Do they have the skills or the qualifications needed to do this job? Even if they fall a little bit short of that, there's still more important things that you're looking for in a hire ultimately.
Right.
And it is just that of having the understanding of you're chosen for a reason. Right? They made a decision to have you there, and it's like, yeah, stand in your power, own that, and know that, it's bigger than just
Right. Right.
yourself or your insecurities or those limiting beliefs, right? So yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love
I
that.
love that.
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap this up, but what I like to ask all of my
Yes.
guests that come on is, what are you currently reading right now, or what is a favorite book of yours, and what would you
You asked
recommend?
the right person. Because I stand on books, and that's like another thing. I know you had asked earlier, like, what kind of advice you could give someone mid-career. Part of always staying ready is always reading. Like, and I'll give another tidbit with that. Don't just read things that are related to your field. Sometimes it's good to read
Yes.
like non-related stuff. So currently, I've been on this like audiobook binge. So
Yes. What do you use?
I use. I feel like that was a trick question to some of you.
I know. I was like, is this a
Yeah,
setup?
no. So when I can, I use the Spotify app, but it doesn't have all the
Nice.
books that I want. So the alternative to that is Audible. So right now I am listening to The Power of Ignorance, which is
Okay.
a kind of like an advertising marketing book, and basically essentially what the author is talking about is how there's actually an advantage to being ignorant, because ignorant people become curious. What's dangerous is when
Mm-hmm.
you think you know everything or have the answer to every problem out there in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you don't
Mm-hmm.
have the answer to something, you're then forced to have some level of curiosity, which then, you start to discover. So he talks about certain people. This might not be the best example, but Christopher Columbus didn't know that there was a land called America, even though it wasn't called America at that time. He didn't know that
Mm-hmm.
the Caribbean islands were there. They thought they didn't even know what they were going to find. They just knew that there was something there, and by accident,
Mm-hmm.
they they discovered those islands. So,
Mm-hmm.
The Power of Ignorance is what I'm reading right now.
Okay, nice. Nice. And who's the author, sorry?
Great question. The author is author. Where are you? Power of Ignorance. I should have this. I should know this. Give me 1 second.
No worries. I'm the same. I'm like good with titles, authors. I'm like, I have no idea.
Yeah. What are you reading? I'm curious.
I do audiobooks as well.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm reading The Attention Merchant by Tim Wu.
Ooh.
Very similar. I was actually going to recommend it after we stopped recording, but since you
Yeah.
asked me, I'll drop it here. It's also a book on advertising and just, I think, like the subtitle, it's like the constant effort to get into our brains, essentially.
Mm.
So it talks about like the origination of advertising, where it started, how it kind of grew to what it was, talks about World War II and
Wow.
how big of a play that
I'm
had
interested.
in advertising and like, Hitler, things like
Yeah.
that. I love that book. It's my second time reading it. Yeah, it's just a good eye opener. I got it as a Christmas gift a few years ago.
Nice.
And it's one of the few like hard copies that
Mm.
I'm actually reading. I'm not really good with, I love an
Right.
audiobook. Um, yeah, I'm like, should I even drop who I use? Whatever. We'll skip that. I'm
Yeah.
like, they don't need the advertising.
Right. Right.
But either way, yeah, I'm the same with
Yeah.
audiobooks. I love listening on the go in the morning. I love podcasts, so
Right.
that's easy for
Right.
me. But just the discipline portion, that's why I kind of do that hard,
Right.
copy. So that's Tim Wu has been there, and I was like, it's a good one.
Yeah,
So
I'm
it's
definitely
kind
gonna
of
take
like what I
that one
reach.
down. The author
Mm-hmm.
is Dave Trott. Uh,
Dave
Another
Trott.
good
Okay,
one that I
nice.
think people would like as well, based on what you just said,
Yeah.
is Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. It's called
Okay.
Alchemy. Brilliant, brilliant book. I mean, probably one of the best advertising marketing books I've ever read thus
Okay,
far.
nice.
Just the way his level of thinking. Like, he just gave one quick example I'll share really quickly. He was talking about,
Mm-hmm.
like, people were saying that the ride between London to Paris, some people felt was too long, and they've been trying to figure out how they
Mm-hmm.
can shorten it. He's like, the expensive
Mm-hmm.
way would be to bring in a bunch of engineers, find if there's a way to kind of speed up how fast the train goes, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really expensive. He's like, really, what the
Mm-hmm.
issue is that people don't have enough things to fill up their time. So what if we just increase the entertainment value on the train,
Mm-hmm.
which will speed
Mm-hmm.
up your perception of time? So maybe I don't know, you
Yeah.
have like a Cirque du Soleil show on the train ride, and then
Right.
next thing you know, oh my God, I'm in Paris, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Totally.
yeah,
Totally. Spoken like a true product manager. That's like typical product management, right? Like, how can we make it more enjoyable for the end
right.
user? And it is just that, right? It's like being able to enjoy the
Hmm.
ride, and probably what's making it feel lengthy is the fact that, yeah, people have nothing to
Right, they're
do on
just sitting
there.
there. Yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of like when you're on the plane and like the screens don't work or like there's no Wi-Fi. You're like, oh my God, this is taking
yeah,
forever. But once you have that, it's
yeah.
like you're there in no
Time
time.
flies.
So the reason as to why I like bringing up books so much
Hmm.
is that because oftentimes we don't have in our network,
Hmm.
right? People that we can go to, speak to, or ask questions of. But I love the power of just being able to read, because these are people ultimately, these authors, ultimately people you can bring into your network and connect with and get a better understanding of what their life is, what their journey is like. So thank you so much for sharing
No,
that.
thank
Yeah, I
you.
really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll wrap this up here. Thank you so much, Corey, for coming on to the pod. It was my pleasure having you. For anyone that's looking to connect with you, they want to listen to your podcast, where can they find
Yeah,
you?
so Three Questions on Corey Kareem can be found on all major podcast platforms. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Corey Kareem, CoreyKareem, Corey Kareem.
Awesome. You heard it here, guys. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
All right, peace and love.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Technically Yes podcast. If you liked today's episode, rate this podcast 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you would like to get in touch with me, reach out to me on Instagram at the Tech Yes Pod, and find me and subscribe on YouTube by looking up the Technically Yes podcast. Thanks again, and chat to you guys next week.